Good evening, everybody. And once again, a big welcome to Kahani Kancheti, uh, our talk shows, which we call them Kahani Addas. So today, we are going to discuss a book, uh, which is actually a translation of Tagore's Pother Sanchoy called Gleanings of the Road, which has been translated by Professor Somdatta Mandal. So we will have Professor Mondol with us, and to discuss the book with her will be Professor Amiya Dev. Now, Kahani Kanjeti has been very fortunate of late. In the last month, this is the third time we are doing a session on Rabindranath Tagore. The first one we did was about the history of Sriniketan on a book written by Professor Uma Dasgupta. The second one, which we did on his birthday, Potishe Boishak on 9th May, was on a book by a former Vice Chancellor of Vishwabharati, Professor Shushanto Dattagupta, which was called 2021 Vishwabharati, A Vision Betrayed. And today we are going to discuss the translation of a collection of his essays called Pother Sanchoy. Now, this Gleanings on the Road has been published by Niyogi Books, who are with us collaborating with Kahani Kancheti, and we are collaborating with them to discuss this book. And I have to tell you something about the Niyogi Books per se, which is that it was established in 2004, and it is by now an internationally reputed publishing house with nearly 500 titles, and the list is growing. Now, their focus, they are very clear, is on producing illustrated books on art, architecture, history. In fact, if you look at their catalog, it reads like an alphabet soup. You start with A and you almost end up with Z under each category. And they have a very specific mission, which is that find publishing within reach. And the list is enormous, cutting across heritage, history, culture, religion, biographies, coffee tables, and children's books. Importantly, it is to be also. I must also tell you that if you look at their coffee table books, they're excellent production. So, and there also they have Islamic architecture to Saurav Ganguly. So that's the bandwidth on which Niyogi works. Coming to the book today, what is Pother Sanchoy or Gleanings of the Road? Well, travels have formed an integral part of the personae and creative artist that was Rabindranath. Now, during his travels to England and the USA between 1912 and 1920, Tagore wrote essays for publication in various Bengali journals, including Tattwabiduni. In 1939, Tagore selected 14 of these essays and an appendix containing 7 letters he had written to some of the teachers in Shantiniketan Ashram while he was abroad. Subsequently, they were rewritten in the original essays using more colloquial instead of the formal Sadhu Bhasha or formal language. He also revised the text substantially, and later editions altered the number of essays. And finally, you have Pother Sanchoy, which has, of course, been included in the Rabindra Rachanavali. Now, to discuss this Rabindra Rachana, this Gleanings on the Road, the translator, Professor, I am now going to welcome Professor Somdatta Mandal. Professor Mandal, welcome to the show by Kahani Kancheti and Niyogi Books. I just want to give a small introduction about you, but the audience will have to bear me out. Both my guests today are academicians with over 3.5 decades in the business. So how much I'll be able to say about them, if we keep telling about them, it will probably take the next half an hour. So I think I have been just able to manage to give you some highlights about both of them. Now, Professor Mandal was till 2 years back, she was the professor and head of the Department of English and other modern European languages at Vishwabharati Shantiniketan, having a teaching career that spans 32 years. So I told you correctly, 3.5 decades. She has held several administrative posts in the university. She is also a recipient of several prestigious international fellowships and awards from the Fulbright Foundation, Charles Wallace Trust, Rockefeller Foundation, Shastri Indo-Canadian Institute, and Sahitya Academy. Her areas of interest are, incidentally, American literature, contemporary fiction, film and cultural studies, and diaspora studies and translation. So that is Professor Mandal for us. And there is one thing that struck me just now. Maybe your academicians will be able to correct me. You all remember Professor Shubhok Sengupta, who was in Jadavpur University as head of the department. And somebody had told me that Professor Sengupta had actually done his doctorate on Bernard Shaw, but he was an expert on Shakespeare. An academician had told me, looking at you, doing a translation of Tagore and being a film buff, I mean, that is the sense that I get. And now to introduce Professor Amiya Dev, who will be in conversation with Professor Mandal. So Professor Dev is here. Welcome, sir, to our session. And this, again, I have another problem with Professor Amiya Dev. Again, he is a professor of comparative literature at Jadavpur University, and has written widely in Bengali and English. Yes, sir. Including biographies of two major Bengali poets after Tagore, and has edited and co-edited a number of volumes, including Comparative Literature, Theory and Practice with Shishir Kumar Das, The Renewal of Song, Renovation in Lyric Conception and Practice with Earl Roy Minor, and Epic and Other Higher Narrative Essays in Intercultural Studies with Stephen Shankman for International Comparative Literature Association, of which he is a former vice president. He has retired as the vice chancellor of Vidyasagar University. One of the books written by Professor Dev has been published by Nyogi. It's called Rereading Tagore, and it reads his novels Gora and Jogajog in depth, and Charodhaya as a crucible of our time. So incidentally, that book also is talked about, that it says that he's above all a poet, and it's amply illustrated, not by his poems and alone and songs. A principal thrust in these pages, it also talks about his love for Guru Nanak, along with other medieval saints, that is a part of the vision of India. So that is, so now you will agree with me that our guests today are, the academics that we can always look up to. With that, but before we start this session, I'm taking permission from both of you all. I have a small little paragraph to read out, which I can't help. But this is going to be in Bengali, because I think, I know this will be discussed later, but let me just read this out in Bengali, because this is something that I must read in Bengali. It's from Tagore's original Prof Sanchoy. In the preface, which is which he calls it Jatrar Purbo Patro. That is the rationale that why he has been traveling. And it says that, I'm reading this out in Bengali, forgive me, প্রয়োজন না থাকিলে মানুষ অকস্মাৎ কেন বাহিরে যাইবে, এ প্রশ্নটা আমাদের দেশেই সম্ভব। বাহিরে যাইবার ইচ্ছাটাই যে মানুষের স্বভাব সিদ্ধ, এ কথাটা আমরা একেবারে ভুলিয়া গিয়েছি। কেবলমাত্র ঘর আমাদিগকে এত বাঁধনে এমন করিয়া বাঁধিয়াছে, চৌকাটের বাইরে পা বাড়াইবার সময় আমাদের এত অযাত্রা, এত অবেলা, এত হাসি টিকটিকি, এত অশ্রুপাত, যে বাহির আমাদের পক্ষে অত্যন্তই বাহির হইয়া পড়িয়াছে। And later on he says that আধ্যাত্মিক উন্নতির জন্য ভ্রমণের প্রয়োজন আছে, এ কথাটা আমাদের দেশের লোকেরা মানিয়া থাকে। সেই জন্য কেহ কল্পনা করিতেছেন, এ বয়সে আমার যাত্রার উদ্দেশ্য তাহাই। এই জন্য তারা আশ্চর্য হইতেছেন, সেই উদ্দেশ্যে ইউরোপ সাধিতে হইবে কি করিয়া। এই ভারতবর্ষের তীর্থে ঘুরিয়া এখানকার সাধু সাধকদের সঙ্গ লাভ করাই একমাত্র মুক্তির উপায়। That is a comment that is being made by Tagore. And there is one more thing I want to read out from the book. It is about his extract from his trip to Bombay, his visit to Bombay, which I think is this is exactly the trip that he made. Yeah, this is, here we are. 1 minute. He says in one part, just strolling in the garden at Matharan, I tried to remember our own Beeden Park and Gold Dighi. It just shows that Tagore used to also go for a walk in Beeden Park and Gold Dighi, and how wretched their miserylessness appeared now to be. He also says later that I noticed one of the other thing in the city of Bombay. This was the wealth of the locals. How many Parsi, Muslim, and Gujarati traders' name I saw emblazoned on the walls of their mansion. So many names inscribed so prominently cannot be seen anywhere in Kolkata and Calcutta, of course. Uh, they are wealth in Kolkata. Their wealth stems from salaried service and the Jomidari system. Hence, it is very drably displayed. So I think he had made a comment. Of course, he had also commented on the Jomidari system by saying that the Jomidari revenue does not grow. It's like water which is sinking, which is why I think one of the reasons why after the partition, because the East Bengal, the major Zamidaris were in the eastern part of Bengal, including he himself. But which is why after the partition, the Zamindari's wealth absolutely collapsed because there was no further resource. Now, having said all this, I am now going to go off the air, so to say, and I leave you all to Professor Mondal and Professor Dev. So please go ahead with this session. I will be coming back to you from time to time.
Yes. Professor Mondal, would you like to begin? Before you begin, I was reminded of a clary hue that Ananda Shankar Rai once wrote on Rabindranath's travel. Was a great traveler, world traveler. Ananda Shankar wrote a clary hue. That's a very interesting clary hue. বাংলাতে বলছি রবীন্দ্রনাথ ঠাকুর এবার যাচ্ছেন পাকুড় চায়না কিংবা পেরু না সেইখানেই তো করুণা Now you go ahead.
I don't know where to begin and what to say, but basically I must admit that, which Mr. Shujit also was quite surprised and mentioned about my interest in American literature and culture studies. So I must admit that I knew nothing of Rabindranath, so to say, but my job at Vishwabharati actually brought me into the fold. And when I started reading, writing a little bit, because we had about Tagore, because we had a DRS SAP project called Tagoreana in our department. And every year we had to produce a book and a seminar related to Tagore. So every time we would have to crack our brains where to focus on. And that is how Tagore and travel was highlighted. And I started getting interested. Of course, earlier I had been into travel literature for a long time, but particularly travel writing as such per se, vis-a-vis Rabindranath, was not my cup of tea, you might say. And when we started this, I still remember a very jocular comment made by a professor of the Hindi department regarding my program about Tagore and travel. And he just looked at me and said, "आप भी बूढ़े के दाढ़ी में लटके गए?" So आप भी दूसरा कोई नहीं, आप भी लटके गए. So I still remember that jovial way he had said it, because I too became a Tagore, connoisseur. People thought so by default of staying at Shantiniketan and teaching at Vishwabharati. And we really, you must admit that many of us teachers, apart from the seminar and the SAP project, we also got a big thrust with 2011, the 150th birth anniversary celebrations, writing, seminars, all over India, all over the world. And people started inviting us. They think, oh, they teach at Shantiniketan, they must be experts on Tagore. So that is how I must admit my little knowledge of the poet, which can never end, began. So travel narrative and this got together. I had already started translating many Tagore travel pieces which were not anthologized in any books, like little things. One is a couple of letters, if you remember. Robindranath লিখছেন আমার he is going to Darjeeling, North Bengal with 5 women only, and he is chaperoning them. জাহাজে যাচ্ছেন, ট্রেনে যাচ্ছেন, সুটকেস বের করছেন, সুটকেস ঢোকাচ্ছেন, লাস্টে লিখছেন আমার বাক্স ফোবিয়া হয়ে গেল সারাক্ষণ বাক্স গুনতে গুনতে। তারপরে সর্দি, তারপরে হাঁচি, তারপরে কাশি, তারপরেই দার্জিলিং। So এইটাও রবীন্দ্রনাথ। So this kind of letters. Then in a very early piece, Balok Potrika, যেটা he's edited along with the family members. So in Balok, he wrote a small piece called Hajaribagh. And he talks about going to Hajaribagh with his 2 nephews, and the nephew and the niece, Indira and her brother. And he was to
Shouldn't.
chaperone them, because of the long summer holidays. And that beautiful narration, if you read it, it is wonderful to read about it. He calls the essay Dosh Diner Chuti. So these
Ah,
little things, it's called Dosh Diner Chuti. Dosh Diner Chuti, ki kore they went in palki, they stayed in dak bungalows, and then the servants took them, what they ate there on the way. It is wonderful. Then again, pieces like Borop Pora, the first time he sees snowfall in the US when everything turns white. So these little pieces started making me get interested in Tagore and travel.
may,
And
may, may,
it,
may I make
yes,
Somdatta, make an interjection
yes,
about
please.
Pada, snowfall? It reminded me of one of the pieces in Pather Sanchoy, which is in Bangla called America Chithi, letter from America. You have translated that. Yeah. It's fascinating in the sense that, he felt at one with this snow white universe, as it were. It happened at Urbana, Illinois. He was staying there. Yeah, go ahead, please. I
No,
simply
and
mind.
as you talk about Borapora, it is very interesting. He talks about the whiteness and the snow, and towards the end, he mentions about Shiva and Parvati. And when
Yeah.
I had sent this translated piece for publication in a journal called Seminar, all related to the 150th sesquicentennial seminar, the editor wrote back to me questioning, "Are you sure Tagore writes about Shiv and Parvati? Are you sure you've done it correctly? Because that lady didn't know to read Bengali. How can you talk about, how can he, being a Brahmo, talk about Shiv আর পার্বতীর মিলন, এই সাদা বরফ দেখে ওনার মনে হয়েছে উনি পৌঁছে গেছেন সেই অমরাবতীতে?" So these things, anyhow, these are beyond the point. And incidentally, during the same time, I got fortunate enough to be invited to contribute something for the Essential Tagore, which was brought out by Harvard University Press, which
Fakhrul Alam
was
and Radha.
edited by Fakhrul Alam and Radha Chakraborty. And they wanted to break the notion that Tagore was a poet only, and they wanted to include different kinds of genre of the poet's writing selection, and they invited me to contribute. So I
You
suggested,
contributed Mumbai.
I contributed 4 travel essays, from this.
Mhm.
একটা হচ্ছে ওই সমুদ্র পাড়ি, আর একটা হচ্ছে
Mhm.
লন্ডনে. So that is how, I got into পথের সঞ্চয়, because everyone knows that all the essays that are included in পথের সঞ্চয় are not literally travel narratives per se. Some of them are philosophical musings while he is traveling or talking about other things. So those 4 essays were included in the Harvard volume. Along with that, I had also translated some Hashokautuk pieces, the short skits of Tagore. So from the very beginning, my ambition was not to delve into the big narratives, but find out more, references to letters, to essays related to travel. Here I am
Can,
reminded of,
yeah, can we now get back to this
yes,
book?
Pathe
Yeah,
Sanchoy. Now,
yeah,
Pathe
Prof
Sanchoy,
Yeah.
as
Well,
um,
let me congratulate
yes,
you on the not just translation, but on the title of the translation, Gleanings of the Road. You are in very good company because Amiya Chakraborty translated one of the pieces here, uh, Englander, এর ইংল্যান্ডের আহ, পল্লী
Bahuk Samaj.
পল্লীগ্রাম ও পাদ্রী. Amiya Babu, Amiya Chakraborty translated that, see, from Tagore's own, Rabindranath's own version of Pathe Sanchoy, which came out in 1939, where he selected 13 essays, added one from 1920 travel, and 7 letters he had written from uh, from America to Shantiniketan. Uh, Amiya Chakraborty, in his reference to that essay, he used the translation Pather Sanchoy within parentheses Gleanings of the Road. So you are in very good company. I would like to congratulate you on company of Amiya Chakraborty, who was a very good poet and not just Rabindranath's secretary, literary secretary for quite a few years, but also uh, he had a good correspondence uh, with Rabindranath. Rabindranath's letters to Amiya Chakraborty, Chittipatra 11, are fascinating. Fascinating. Anyway, let's go back to this volume. Now, what you have done is, I appreciate it because it's very holistic. Rabindranath's version, 1939, incidentally, Pathe Sanchoy is the last travel writing to come out, although he deals with 1912-13 visit. 1912-13 visit is very crucial, historic visit, because that led to the Nobel Prize, eventually led to the Nobel Prize. Now, uh, uh, he had been writing, he began with Jatrar Purvapatra, see, prelude to the journey, and then kept writing during the actual trip. And then when he arrived in England, and he kept writing and publishing these essays. So in all 22, and
Yes,
all in chaste bhasha, chaste language, sadhu bhasha. Uh, Now, what you did, you have done, is go back to these, see, the original, uh, which Vishwabharati brought out as second edition of Pathe Sanchoy. They withdrew Rabindranath's own Pathe Sanchoy, which contained 13 essays from the ones he had published, cut them down, and changed the chaste to colloquial Bangla, and added one piece which contained three short pieces from his 1920. You have written all that. Uh, uh, the Vishwabharati publication uh, withdrew that, and in 1947 brought out a Sanchoy, right, comprising those 22 essays which had come out during his trip to England. Uh, when West Bengal, government of West Bengal brought out a centennial রচনাবলী, রবীন্দ্র রচনাবলী শতবার্ষিক সংস্করণ, জন্ম শতবার্ষিক সংস্করণ, they followed the Vishwabharati edition, the second edition. That is those 22 pieces, including two pieces on Shikha, Shikha Vidhi and Lokho Shikha. The subsequent West Bengal Rachanaboli on the occasion of Rabindranath 125 went back to Rabindranath's version, see, those 13 essays plus the 1920 piece, plus the 7 letters he had written from America. And also, interestingly, an additional section containing 7 pieces from the original essays which had come out in Tattvabodhini, Pravarshi, Bharati. So, what you have done, you have gone to the original essays, see, that is the Vishwabharati publication and second edition, plus you have kept the 1920, plus you have kept these 7 letters. See, that's, I would say that's a very holistic approach to, of course, since you were translating from Bangla, you were not involved with the difference between Sadhu and Charit. After all, English doesn't have Sadhu and Charit,
No, but
So
I must
these
say
were, these are
this is
longish
something.
essays. Yeah, it's interesting because one wouldn't know. Interestingly, the recent, again, the government of West Bengal has brought out Rachana on the occasion of Rabindranath 150 Shartha Shatak Varsho. I think the volume 18 or 19, I don't remember, contains, incidentally, he deals with his third visit to England and America, third visit to the West, see. And yet, it was the last piece of travel writing. I mean, when you think of, his travel writings, begins with Europe, Pravashi Patra, etc. And, now, Arnold Shankar Rai's joke, interesting joke, China, Kimba, Peru now. Peru was his travel, Pushim Jatri Diary. You remember that? See, Rabindranath was a great traveler. Now, I think he, in Jatra Purvapatra, which is quite long, I mean, the original piece was quite long. He cut it down, really cut it almost half. He spoke of the West quite positively. See, I mean, his vision of the West, interestingly, his vision of the West is in contradiction to our sometimes the popular vision of the West as materialistic. See, he went into that at some length. Now, would you like to talk about Rabindranath's vision of the West in connection with this book, What is Sanchoy? Because he does have a vision See, Kala or Kaj. See, I mean, there he has a vision. He talks about particularly the Western passengers on board the ship. See, uh, it will be interesting to hear you, since you have translated those 22 pieces and uh, also taken care of the 7 letters. See, and his essay, his piece on the during the 1920 travel, where 3 short pieces are put together, 1920. And the last piece, the third piece, is very interesting. It's going through Suez. You remember that? And, and on the right
Left side
was
he sees Egypt and the
Egypt,
civilization,
right?
and the right side is the
Yeah,
barrenness of the. That is wonderful. Now,
wonderful,
you
wonderful.
have already mentioned, and this is when I started translating this whole book, I was also in a dilemma, and because of the different selective methods of what should be the ideal Pather Sanchoy to be translated. As you rightly mentioned, that I was baffled too, because in various editions by Vishwabharati, by Poshchim Bongo, there were differences apart from the. I was really surprised why, I don't know due to what editorial lapses. Just a minute, আমি বাইরে নিয়ে গিয়ে কথা বলবো।
Hmm.
Sorry. So, and I was really very surprised why Tagore's selection of the 14 essays, that he really wanted it to be a much more travel piece, a travel narrative per se, and why that inclusion was later after his death not honored. It was whose editorial lapse to go back to the original, the Shadu Basha pieces, and not include the corrections he made, how he wanted and edited to do it. This should have come out in a separate book. Vishwabharati should have brought that version out till today. So what I thought was, if someone just wants to read Poteshancha, he will not get the true picture. In other words, his picture of the book will depend on what version of what anthology he or she is following. If he
Let
is
me make an
following,
yeah. Let me
yes,
make an interjection here. Yeah, it's a very
yes,
interesting. I mean, Professor Sanchoy is a very interesting case, and one can study. See, uh, our perception of text. You see, text, particularly when you think of a writer like Tagore, writer like Rabindranath. See, I mean, he went over and over and over again. Dr. Kurabi had a number of versions. See, now it's yeah, yeah. So, what is a text? Now, this is where one of our friends, Shukanta Chaudhary, would be very interested. See, text is not just one text. কেউ বলবেন, some of my friends would say there is a Manno text, since Rabindranath himself selected not 14, 13 plus one from
and
1920. Yeah, 13 essays, পুষ্পপত্র, জলস্থল, বোম্বাই শহর, জলস্থল, সমুদ্র পাড়ি, যাত্রা, লন্ডনে, বন্ধু, কবি এইডস, ফ্রকফোর্ড ব্রুক, ভাবুক সমাজ, ইংল্যান্ডের পল্লী সমাজ ও পাদ্রী, পল্লী ক্লাব ও পাদ্রী, and then সঙ্গীত. These 13 he chose, and he left out 9, which are you right. You very right to say that he was trying to uh, 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 present it as a out Anandaru, for instance. He left out uh, Duicha, which is a very interesting essay. He left out Kala or Kaj. And, I mean, 9 pieces he had originally written. And those two Shikha essays, Shikha Bidyan Lokko and Shikha, that were included, see, in his book, Shikha. Uh, so it's interesting that author Sanchoy, for instance, reader today, who is going to read Author Sanchoy. He has how many texts? He has one Rabindranath Shatabarsha volume. All right, 125. Then Shatabarshik. These are all Government of West Bengal. Then he has the Vishwabharati Rachanavali. That contains the second edition. And, and then finally he has the original Rabindranath. You, you quoted something, a letter he had written to Ajit Kumar Chakraborty in 1915. Yeah. Now, let me go back to the question of the West, Rabindranath's view of the West. I think one of the things that he was doing there, see, I mean, he doesn't talk of that, but he said Asia and Europe should meet one another. See, should meet one another. This is very important. And here, I think we immediately reminded of Kipling. East is east, west is west, and the twain shall never meet. And Rabindranath is a living answer to that. Not only because of Vishwabharati, Vishwabharati Ekanisha, but his own travels. His own travels. There is a certain background, a little background in Rabindranath's diaries. The one tells us that the 1912-13 trip came as something like Rabindranath was unwell, sick. He was convalescing. He had come to Shilaida. Babu and Pratima Devi were looking after the estate at the time. And he was unwell, and they wanted to sort of, keep up his spirit. They thought of a boat trip, Jahaj Jatra. Uh, they initially thought of going to Sri Lanka, Ceylon at that time, then Singapore maybe, see, and finally to Japan. And Ratibabu's nephew, Ratibabu's cousin in Surendranath Tagore, Shutandranath's son, that, he also, like you, he was a great translator. He translated a number of Tagore pieces. Now, Surendranath Tagore advised them that it would be better not to go to Japan. It would be better to go to Europe. And Rabindranath agreed. That was the background to 1912-13. And they boarded the ship. You have Purvapatra and then Mumbai Shahar boarded the ship at Bombay. I think the ship was named with something. I've forgotten the title of the ship. Name of the ship. Ship was City of Glasgow. Interesting name for a ship, City of Glasgow. On 27th May 1912. And you have written all that in your introduction, and came back from America and England in 1913 in September. See, the Nobel was announced a little later. See, but there's a letter that he wrote to Indira Devi in 1913. Indira had asked him about Gitanjali song offerings, how it came about. And Amiya Chakraborty's Tagore Reader, the volume he edited in 1961, Tagore Centenary, see, came out from Boston. Uh, that letter, part of that letter is quoted. And Rabindranath was describing, you know, the process of translation. See, uh, and how, William Rothenstein, Bundhu, friend, the chapter, friend, Bundhu. See. Anyway, so uh, it'll be interesting uh, to hear uh, uh, your response or reaction to Rabindranath's vision of the West as uh, uh, as shown or as appeared in these essays. He is,
I,
is
I
he? Yeah, please,
Yes.
please.
I really can't get into much details as I'm not, as I've already mentioned, my knowledge is quite superficial. Still, I consider myself not a Tagore scholar at all, like you all have read much more. But what I literally feel is that when we read these Pother Sanchoy pieces, some of them cannot be called travel narratives per se, which I've already, but they are philosophical musings of the time, things that were going on in his mind, which people might question why were they included in Pother Sanchoy, but it is a kind of experience. Pother Sanchoy doesn't always mean physically narrating places that you have visited. But one thing about the West, the question you ask me, and I think this applies to most travel narratives, which I've been reading and writing a lot on 19th century travel narratives. And this constant comparison between East and the West, between our culture and their culture, is seen in writings by everybody, always comparing the little bit piece Shujit Babu read about Goldighi comparing, Calcutta, your
Mhm.
roots with the West. This is always embedded. But in the case of Tagore, what I feel is the comparison or, the acceptance of the West vis-a-vis his first Europe Probashir Potro and Europe
Yes,
Jatrir
yes.
Diary, the way he wrote about the West, it mellows down a lot because maybe this is his third visit, primarily. And 19, this is his third visit. And he becomes much more mature enough not to constantly go on comparing our culture with their culture. This, and he sees the positive side also, and you can make out that it is not comparison like Englander polygram o padri, that essay.
Mhm.
Or I'm not talking about Stopford Brooke and others, but the
Mhm.
thoughtful society of England, this
Mhm.
Englander
Abuk
Bhabuk,
Samaj. Samaj.
Englander Bhabuk Samaj, these come from much more closer, and what I mean to say, much more matured approach to the West than what he did in his earlier trips or
Yes.
Europe Provashi.
Yeah,
Yes,
so think of
this,
the people he met
yes,
through Rothenstein. Yeah, H.G. Wells, uh, Yeats.
yes.
He has a piece on Yeats, and he says at the end, I haven't read his poetry yet, but meeting him and talking to him, see, and reading
No,
about him.
yes,
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
relationship with Yeats has been discussed in academia a lot because of, maybe because of Yeats's criticism
Yeah,
later
yeah,
about, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
when
yeah,
Yeats became not a friend but a foe, you might say.
yeah,
His sympathies with the poet, which he had expressed earlier, and that famous line, it's quoted
mm,
at random about whether he can at all write in English at all. So
yeah,
people talk about Yeats. So I'm not talking about Yeats, but essays like Social Difference, Samaj Bhed, which you would think, why is it included in a
Pather
collection
Sanchoy.
of Pother Sanchoy? But these are, I think, in the long run, when I started reading it, I found some of these essays very difficult to translate. And I was very scared of, retaining the original words and sentence structure, which usually translators take the liberty of changing. But I was so scared to leave it as, make it as sacrosanct and true to the original as possible. So some of them might read like boring English, but well, some of these essays to an average reader who goes to this Gleanings of the Road expecting a lot of information about his travel and his vision and what he sees new. But these introspections actually come with his interaction of the West. So it is one step removed, but they are true that he would not have been able to write these if he had not gone and thought and discussed about the West. One little digression I want to mention here, that that letter you have where he talks about the stokers, the coal miners, the people on the ship on strike, and the ship not moving fast enough, and then one of the stoker dies. So this is another experience, you might say, that all is not right with the world, but that was not included as part of his travel narratives, which should have been included. So it is very difficult. And I remember when this book came out, a reviewer, I don't know, some journal in Mumbai wrote a very horrible review of this book, my translation, and said, why did this book needed to be translated? I don't know what he was expecting of Tagore. Is the book worth translating at all? This reviewer had questioned. Where is the travel in this? So, for an average reader, I think this is something which is which might sound deceptive. That Gleanings of the Road is not always describing the road, but the philosophical musings behind it, especially his view of the West. And he does not make, I repeatedly see, the constant comparisons or critiquing the West that he did earlier in his younger days when in Europe Probashir Potro or
Yeah.
Europe Jatri Diary. This is what I felt.
Okay, I mean, maybe uh, we're about to close. Yeah, 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 yeah. Sujit Babu is here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sujit
Now,
Babu.
I just wanted to say two things. I just wanted to say two things. Sitting in the background and listening to you all, both of you, it's a tremendous treasure that was coming out. And there was so much to know, there was so much to learn. And there are small little things that both of you all were sharing, which I think anybody who is in any way really interested in Tagore would be equally. And I know some of the people who are actually watching this are my friends who are Tagore buffs, if I have to say, including the direct descendant of Indira Devi. If you remember, they run a school called Indira Goshti, who they are into promoting Tagore songs, and it was started by Shupurna Chaudhuri and Subhash Chaudhuri. So their daughter and granddaughter, they run this now, and they are right now online. But there is one thing that Professor Mundul, I want to close this with this one point, which you said that a writer in Mumbai, never mind whether he is a Bengali or a non-Bengali material, but the fact is, see, this is where I think the correction has to be done. When I was discussing, and therefore I had to go through this book by Professor Uma Dasgupta on the history of Sriniketan, I realized that it is a vision. It's a vision that should have been applied by the Indian system, the Indian government on rural development, on how to help rural people from self-sufficiency to even diseases, to environment, that, all this environment and green world we are talking about, it is all there in the Sriniketan plan. When we discussed this other thing about Professor Sushanta Dattagupta's vision betrayed, there were a lot of exchanges which was coming out that what have we done. Tagore is, and this book, now I'm coming to this book, the Gleanings of the Road. You're right. This is not a travelogue as in a travelogue. This is a vision. This is an amazing worldview. It is actually a worldview on the way he saw things. It was not a standard thing, like I got up on the boat and, I was served food and, but you don't expect that from Tagore. So the person who has given this damning review, believe you me, a lot of people are getting to things about which they have no concept. Like, a deaf guy trying to ascertain musical theory, but the person is deaf. So therefore, I think at the end of the day, I'm so happy that, the third Kahani Kancheti thing we have done 1 month on Tagore, that for those of us who have been attending this in different sessions, it's a question of revisiting. It's a question of revisiting Tagore. And that, I think, is extremely important, because you're right, 161st year, and we still have not been able to fathom the depth of Rabindranath Tagore. I think this is where these books, and every chapter I read, and believe you me, I had not read Prof Sanchoy earlier, but when I got your copy, I immediately took out the Rabindra Rachanaboli. I took out, matter from which is what I was reading out in the preface, Purvava. This is something. And one more thing, your translation, I must admit, Professor Mandal, has been so easy to understand. The thing is that a lot of people take it that if you have to read Tagore, you must be a very literate and a very academic and so on and so forth. But this is a book that, even I can read. And I'm benchmarking myself as people who can easily understand whatever. So that is where I think it's a great success. And Professor Dev, I wanted to say this in Bengali. আপনি এত কি করে সব আপনার ইয়েতে থাকে, আপনার ঝুলিতে থাকে, such a lot of nuggets of information from letters to everything. This is absolutely amazing. At Kahani Kancheti, we are extremely honored to have had you, and Yogi Books and I would like to join in thanking you for coming to the show today and talking to us about this book. I do hope that in the very near future, we will again meet on discussing some books or the other. And I think, Professor Mandal, I would like to take on that book on those 5 women who were in the last year of Tagore. That I think is. So thank you very much, sir. I have bothered you all from time to time on,
I would like to thank Shubroto Sinha.
Yes. Very Shubroto. Can we see him?
Yeah. Shubroto. No, you can't see him. Shubroto is in the background. But if he hadn't come, you see, all this সব গুবলেট হয়ে যেত। ওই হতো রবীন্দ্রনাথ ঠাকুর এবার যাচ্ছেন পাকুর, আনা কিংবা পেরু না সেইখানেই তো করুণা।
Really, what a line by. Absolutely. Thank you, both of you, for joining us, and thank the audience. I hope you all enjoyed all this. Namaskar.
Thank you. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Well, that was the session today, highly enlightening, and keeping with the Kahani Kancheti motto of engage, entertain, enlighten. I think all 3 things have happened today. And we look forward to seeing you in more such sessions at the Kahani Kancheti Adda. Thank you.